Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
Compulsive behaviors, sex addiction, and pornography. How to make progress in recovery. Welcome to Keeping It Real with Rhoda. Today we welcome all listeners interested in overcoming compulsive behaviors, including pornography and sex addiction, while addressing its effects on relationships, healing, and building stronger connections with partners. Pornography can have negative consequences for both the user and their intimate partner, depending on the level of consumption. One of my beliefs about the core of any addiction is the compulsion, profound desire, or deep need to take the easy way out. Think about how easy it is to watch porn instead of facing the awkwardness or uncertainty of having sex with a real-life person. There is just so much more difficulty in managing our own fears and insecurities to risk sex in actuality. Porn is so easily accessible that it can evolve into a habit that affects relationships. Involvement in pornography is often a taboo subject that we don't discuss in our culture, yet it can be very destructive to individuals and their relationships. Sex addiction remains a subject of debate in the mental health community. It's a pattern of behaviors that are intrusive, compulsive, and cause distress to the individual. There's a lot of research on some of the common damaging effects of pornography for users, which can include addiction, isolation, increased aggression, distorted beliefs and perceptions about relationships and sexuality, negative feelings about themselves, and neglecting other areas of their life. So there is information about the research in Fight the New Drug from 2023, Maltz and Maltz in 2006, etc. Users face difficulty becoming sexually aroused without pornography. Users lose interest and engage in fewer sexual experiences with a partner. Pornography consumption may be correlated with increased behaviors of hooking up and infidelity. Both user and partner experience decreased relationship sexual satisfaction and emotional closeness. Relationship trust decreases due to dishonesty and deception. Research about partners having a partner with problematic pornography use can be very challenging, and spouses often feel responsible or blame themselves for their partner's behavior. Research by Schneider in 2003. There's far less research on sex addiction because it is not sponsored by the NIH. So both pornography and sexual addiction are very challenging issues for couples. There can be real communication challenges because porn use and sexual addiction can make communication about intimacy and sexual preferences impossible. Individuals may find it difficult to discuss their feelings or concerns openly, fearing judgment or rejection. Shame makes this difficult to admit to therapists. The focus of being able to be in recovery is often a complicated, hard path that works. And that's the part people need to remember. Sex addiction can improve with open and honest dialogue with the help of a therapist. The addict typically hides their behavior, leading to a culture of secrecy and mistrust and isolation. There is hope from one last research study on porn. When both individuals are committed as a team to working together to have a healthy relationship, they can begin to repair their relationship. Spencer, 2019. Both pornography and sex addiction are complicated issues affecting intimacy, trust dynamics, and emotional connection. Addressing these challenges requires compassion, understanding, and a commitment to fostering genuine connection in relationships. Lastly, I want to use a quote from Turkle on the NPR podcast Body Electric, who has been studying home tech relationships since the 1980s. They say the newer generative AI bots offer a special challenge. The trouble with this is that when we seek out relationships of no vulnerability, we forget that vulnerability is really where empathy is born. I call this pretend empathy because the machine does not empathize with you. It does not care about you. Turkle worries that these frictionless artificial relationships could set up unrealistic expectations for real human relationships, which is the similar issue that develops in a reliance on porn. Today's guest is uniquely qualified to help us navigate some of the solutions to this issue in relationships. Steve Shields is a licensed therapist who is dedicating his life to a message of recovery and hope for sex addiction. In 2014, Steve started to work on his own sexual addiction recovery. In January of 2016, he founded Unashamed, Unafraid, a podcast that shares recovery stories and is in the top 10% on iTunes. And like this podcast, is in the top 1% globally. He operates a nonprofit to help those in recovery. Thanks for being here, Steve.
Excited to be here, Rhoda.
So let's begin by you clarifying, when is porn consumption healthy curiosity, and what are early warning signs it's become a problem and then an addiction? And when is sex addiction a problem that needs to be faced? Please help my audience understand the differences.
Yeah, so what I would say is it's that key of compulsive behavior. So the misunderstanding people have about addiction is actually anything can be addiction. So a future book I'm going to write is I'm going to say, hey, in my 30-year career, right, when I'm as wise as you are, Rhoda, I'm going to say I've done all this work with all these people. And so that, losing 10 pounds in January or that school, whatever that little thing is, I'm going to give you all the secret tricks from these deep, giant, dark recovery people that have figured, that out. And then the end of the book's going to say, psych, it's all addiction. You have addiction just like everyone else. And so we don't like that word because it means that, I always say it's like putting an orange jumpsuit on. Like it means you're a felon, you're othered, you're bad. So like no one ever is like, I think I have an addiction. Like that is not something you want to cop, right? And so what I tell you is any behavior can get compulsive or be underperformed. Right? So we look at it with eating. I can have compulsive eating on the top end where I'm destroying my health, taking years off of my life, making me physically incapable to do things like have sex or go for a walk. And we can see eating go all the way on the other end, right? Where we get into eating disorders like anorexia. We can see it happening with working out, work, churching out, right? I can do too much, too little shopping, right? Self-care where I cannot have a hair on my head or eyebrows missing at all, to where I just don't even shower. I'm the person on the subway with BO that everyone's like, bro, come on, help us help you, and doing all the different things. So sex is the same way. I've worked with clients who have, been victims of abuse and different things. Like, I hope I'm never going to have sex again. I'm like, I hope that's not true. I hope that we restore your sexuality and you have healthy sex. And so when we talk about sexual addiction, when people hear that term, I just say, I would hope we can all redefine it as you're just on the compulsive end. And so if what you're doing is compulsive, then I would say you're in the sex addiction camp somewhere. So when I have a mom bring a teenage boy into my office, she's like, he has sexually compulsive behavior. I'm like, great. And I sit down with him. We get mom out of the room. I'm like, what's the deal, dude? Because I don't care. Tell me the truth. He's like, yep, I've seen porn, like, I don't know, every couple months or something, or like it's happened. I would not be like, bro, here's your orange jumpsuit. You are a sex addict. Like, let's go. That is super normal for the age that he is in. I also will not project my own values on anyone. And so there is a ton of damage and a lot of different. One organization I like because they're not religious or politically affiliated on any level. It's just academic research, is a nonprofit called Fight the New Drug that does a lot of facts around pornography and different things. So there's a lot of connection to human trafficking, lack of consent, the lack of empathy you're talking about at the beginning of the episode. But I will not say this is what your values are around porn, everyone in Rhoda's audience. So I'd say compulsive is when it's outside my values. And so when I individually or with my partner am doing things sexually that are outside my values, and it's happening more than once, that's when we know we've got a problem. So if I've got a spouse and I'm like, what's the deal with porn? And they're like, oh yeah, I've seen like porn a couple of times, whatever. I don't have a problem with that, right? When I have someone that's like, what do you mean I never look at porn? I go to church every Sunday. Of course I don't look at porn. Don't talk to me about it ever again. I'm like, now we got a problem.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I like your distinction about it, and I think there's a lot of I don't think people think enough about how they're compulsive.
Oh, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
And I like how you added in a whole lot of other opportunities to be compulsive.
Oh, you can do anything. And that's why I'd say if you want to understand someone who has sexual addiction, just stop that thing that you're doing outside your values. So I'll show you a story from my personal life. So I had 3 big relapses in my recovery. So we're on relapse number 2, and I go down to my in-laws because they've heard, and we live close to them geographically, to kind of have the conversation. Like, it happened, you hate me, you don't, whatever. Like, let's reconcile our deal here. And my father-in-law is like, I just don't get it. Like, clearly you're on God. Clearly you're good. Like, just stop. Like, there's just so much collateral damage. Just stop. And my father-in-law is a good dude. He has been kind to me in my life. He is kind to my children. He's a good man. And I said to him, I said, hey, you know how you always say that if you couldn't have chocolate anymore to give you a gun? Or his literal words. He's like, oh yeah, if I couldn't have chocolate anymore, give me the gun. Implementing suicide, if anyone's missing that. And I said, you know how you say that? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so now imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and I said to you, if you ever eat chocolate again, your wife is not going to want to be close to you. In fact, she might divorce you. They're going to kick you out of your church. People are not going to think you're safe around their children. And no one's going to want to be close to you or say you're okay. Don't ever eat chocolate again, dear father-in-law. Just stop. And he paused for a minute and he was like, I get it. And I'm like, I would love for my problem to be chocolate and not sex. If I could change drug of choice and that just worked, brother, I would do it, right? And so all of us on some level can relate to that, right? And so why someone in their attachment, maladaptive in sex, we could get all into that of why sex is so powerful. But it is a process that's human. A lot of people in this situation, it's just been taken to an extreme. It's been happening over time. It's caused a lot of damage. But the process is something that actually we all can relate to, which can help to have a lot of empathy in connecting with those people in our lives who have sexual addiction, for us to have self-compassion if you're in my tribe where you're the one doing the shenanigans and the things. But also it helps you with your radar of, does my child or spouse or person I love have this problem?
Absolutely. What are some common misconceptions people have about sex and porn addiction?
Yeah, there's a mountain of them. Once an addict, always an addict. That's my favorite one to debunk out the gate. If anyone is a Brene Brown fan or a Bradshaw fan, or you've ever heard the word shame and don't live under a rock in what's been happening in America in the last 20 years. Right, shame is I am bad. Guilt is I've done something bad, right? So right before this episode started, right, Rhoda, you're super kind. You're like, do you have everything you need? Are you ready? Any questions? I'm like, we're great. I wait till you hit record, and then I'm like, oh, wait, I left my water bottle over here, right? So should I feel guilty about wasting your time? Yeah, you're like a legend in the podcast world. Of course I feel guilty, right, and embarrassed. But if I'm like, oh, I'm just a bad podcast guest now, and I don't know, I'm a bad person, that's shame, right? And so if someone is an addict, that doesn't change. We don't change that. So I don't know what someone does with that other than go crawl in a hole and die, or just put on their own jumpsuit and go get in your cell, right? Like, so I would say to a spouse, or like, if you believe that, first off, I don't know where you got it, because we don't have anything in religious or clinical history that actually supports that. It's just anecdotal of people and their shame that's been perpetuated over time. So the first misconception I would say is people aren't addicts. That's not real. you know the DSM-5 better than I do. There is not, you don't look up in there and they're like, oh yeah, the chapter on addicts.
Did you ever see the documentary by Eve Ensler? She's the one who did the play Vagina Monologues, and it's called What I Want My Words to Do to You. And she was volunteering at a woman's prison where it was all about murder. It was the feds, and everybody in the group had committed murder of some sort. And the thing that I will never forget is she opens the documentary with, we are keeping these people frozen in their mistakes. And I think that's such an ugly part of being human, but we do that because, especially when we don't have self-worth, we like comparing ourselves. Well, we're better than an addict, we're better than a depressed person, we're better than a fat person, whatever it is, and using that to make ourselves feel good instead of figuring out, owning are good and bad, which is why I love working with people in recovery, because they've already got that part and they own their good and they own their bad, and I don't have to do all that educational stuff, because that's truly who we are, is that mixture of both sides, and self-worth is being able to embrace, and they sit quietly next to each other. And I just think we miss out on that when we're so, la-di-da, we're so much better than fill in the blank.
Yeah, and you'll miss and then you'll miss the opportunity for the healing, growth, and connection in the relationship. So I remember, and Kayla, my wife, is a rock star on all the levels. And but early in our process, she has no education, I have no education. I'm still acting out. So I'm hiring prostitutes and acting out, and this whole thing's on. She has no idea. And we see the story of a friend on social media. It's like, hey, we're getting divorced because turns out he had this big sexual addiction, was cheating on me. She's like, if you ever cheated on me, we would be done. Right there, no question. So when we're doing the othering you're talking about, well, what's the message I just got? Dude, lie about it. Shove it down. Don't ever tell her, because if you tell her, you're losing this marriage. You're losing your family. Got it. Message received. So what I'd say is who you should be worried about, particularly when it comes to sexual addiction, is who hasn't disclosed. And that's the number one reason why people don't disclose. They don't have enough safety. And so when it's not safe enough, so if you just look at that snapshot of where I was in my marriage at that time, give me a reason to get honest. You know, where you talk about on the show, right, of having, those vulnerable conversations and coming in. Well, if I'm coming to sit in your office to talk about communication in our marriage, even though there's a huge elephant in the room no one knows about, right? I'm going to sit in your office. What's the signal I'm getting that it's now safe for me to talk about this? Right? When I was told in the car, if this ever happens, you're dead to me. And so we have to create safety for people to talk about it and to be able to own and name what's going on. Just like you were sharing in that story, like that's what makes the difference. We should be worried about the people who aren't telling you about their affair and how much porn they're watching, not the people who are.
Yeah, that's true. How does the brain respond to porn addiction similarly or differently compared to other forms of addiction?
Yeah, so I think I'll say it best. As we had a guy named Dave on the show on Unashamed and Afraid, and I've asked Dave this question multiple times because Dave also had some substance abuse addictions as well, and so I'm like, Dave, which is harder to give up? The meth or the sex addiction? And he's like, oh, dude, the sex addiction for sure. I'm like, well, help me understand that, Dave, because meth, they call it the super drug, right? Like they call it, and he's like, dude, I don't walk around with a needle in my arm ready to get punched any second, but my penis is always with me. And I think that's a good way to say it, is because something that is hard about sexual addiction compared to other addictions is a lot of people, meth, for example, or cocaine, right? We don't look at that and go, Yeah, there's a healthy amount of checking out of your life and using illegal substances. You just need to get that in balance, right? Or even like with alcohol, right? We have some pretty clear lines like, hey, getting blackout drunk in a snowstorm by yourself, bad idea, always. There's not a circumstance in which we want to be doing this, right? Same thing with food. I'm like, no, Rhoda, actually, you going home tonight and eating 3 gallons of ice cream by yourself watching TV, we never have a narrative of that being a healthy experience. But the problem is with sex, we do.
That's right.
And so sex is so deeply connected to our intimacy, and you are far more a legend in this game than I am. In my experience, some of the most difficult trauma people have to get over is sexual trauma, because it runs so deep to the core of identity. And so the problem is, like a lot of drugs, right, whether it's porn or sexually acting out, we have this huge dopamine dump, right? And the problem with porn is it's not real. And so you can go look into a lot of porn situations. If you go look at the documentaries and the things, all the details they're not telling you, right? Like, that is heavily edited. Are you aware that actually wasn't the same woman? That was 3 different women, even though you thought you were watching one. Like, what you're not paying attention to is she is high out of her mind right now on some substances, and that's why she's not screaming in pain with the act that's happening right now. So those experiences, right? And the big trigger with porn is it's something for nothing. Anyone in the United States is 30 seconds away from a giant dopamine dump. I don't know another compulsive behavior that has that much potency for that much time, meaning a little bit of time, huge potency, very little amount of time, access, easy. I don't know anyone who's like, I can get meth in my system in the next 30 seconds. Go. I can turn off this podcast, pick up my phone, boom, I'm dopamine dumping in 30 seconds. And so that's a powerful transaction to put to someone who isn't getting their needs met. Because all addiction is it's just a maladaptive way to meet my needs.
Yes. I'm always saying to partners of the addicted person, when people are hungry, they're going to go sideways to get their needs met. That's what human beings do. And trying to help people see that it's a complicated situation that both people need to address.
Yeah, because it's my job to show up as the person identifying as the one acting out. It's my job to figure out how to get my needs met within my value system.
Yes.
And just like you're saying, the analogy I always use sitting with someone like, would you drink your own urine? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, fast forward. You came out here to Utah to go hiking out in the desert. You're out here by yourself. No one knows where you are. You're lost. It's 3 days later. You have an empty water bottle and a full bladder. You can drink your urine now or you're going to die. What we know about human behavior is 100 out of 100 people will drink the urine. That's all people in addiction are doing. Having heard hundreds of stories at this point, I have never met anyone that's like, so my wife is pissed. I have 2 different affair partners. I'm juggling it all of the time. People get angry, fall out, in, out, all the things. And yeah, my life's great. I'm like, raw, like everyone should be doing what I'm doing. No one's happy in addiction. They're not. And I know there are people listening that are like, my spouse who's like a total narcissist and total. I'm like, I get what you're seeing on the surface. I see them in the back room when they're actually honest. No one in addiction is happy because I'm acting outside of my values. I'm losing myself. I'm not where I want to be. And so although it's quote unquote free, it's easy access for a big dopamine dump, right? The trade-off is very transactional because they also don't know me, right? Like they don't know me. They're not having an experience with me. It's the fake empathy, right? And so when I choose to engage in those relationships, and it's not just porn, affairs are the same way. Affairs are 2 people using each other. So they don't, if they wanted to do it through the front door, they'd get divorced and meet you on a dating app, right? And so it's like, well, I feel, and I've done this a million times. My affair partner really, really loves me. One client I worked with, and I'm like, tell me about that. And we literally timelined the relationship. That's weird because when he comes to town and you don't have sex with him, he doesn't talk to you for like 4 months until you go chasing after him again. That's weird, but he really cares. He didn't care about you. And so there's this upfront super big benefit of a dopamine rush, which is why it's so addictive, why people get so pulled in, right? And it's such easy access, but it's not real intimacy.
That's absolutely right. How does sex addiction affect individual perceptions of intimacy in relationships, besides the lack of empathy?
Yeah, in 2 seconds, it jacks them up. So you can't watch any TV channel for more than like 10 minutes before you see an ad on erectile dysfunction and being ready for the moment, right? So they have, it's not an official medical diagnosis, but they've written articles and talk about what they call porn-induced erectile dysfunction, PIED. So they've had experiences where like young guys, like high school aged guys who should be able to complete the act of sex like 10 times in 24 hours, they're at prom with the cheerleader on the date doing the thing and literally cannot perform because they are so used to hyperarousal they can't show up. And so, and it happens in adult men. And so it literally blocks my ability to do intimacy and connect. I literally can't do. So I hear all the time, he's a narcissist. I'm like, no, he's not. He's numbed out and traumatized. Turn off the numb, do some trauma work. All of a sudden, this guy has all the feels and can shed the tears watching Bambi, right? Like he's available. And so it numbs you out. It makes you incapable of connecting. It numbs you out of your body, out of self, right? And when you're numb, you don't notice. And so it works the same way ibuprofen is, right? If I have a headache right now or a laceration on my arm and I take ibuprofen, that liquid isn't like, let me flow in his nervous system to where that cut is. And no, what does it do? It numbs the pain receptors in my whole body. And so, yes, my arm quits hurting, but everything else is also numbed out. So you're stressed at work, so you decide to stay late and watch an hour of porn. Does that help manage the work stress? Sure does. It does work in the short term. You know what it also does? Makes you completely checked out when you go home and your kids walk up and say, Daddy, Daddy, I love you. And you're like, oh, kids are all right. You are incapable of connecting now because you took the ibuprofen. You numbed the system out. And the other big thing that people miss is they don't have an understanding of like intensity and intimacy. So one of my good buddies, another coach here at our office, Chris Bennett, like a bajillion affairs over 20 years. Chris and I are driving in the car one day and I'm like, okay, Chris, real talk. I'm like, let's take any morality out of it. Best sex you ever had. Because he's done all the acting out stuff. I've done all the acting out stuff. And he's like, all right, Shields, I'll play this game with you. He sits there for a minute. And then he gets a little teary and he's like, with Autumn now. And he starts to cry. These are normal folks, overweight, in their mid-40s, nothing, like they aren't supermodel celebrity people. They're normal folks. How is this guy who's done all these different things saying that's the best sex he ever had? Because sexual addiction, sexual compulsive behavior is like a firework. It is really bright. It is really big. It's also very distant, very cold, and really expensive. Where real intimacy is like building a fire. You can't do it overnight. You've got to get the wood together. You've got to get the food. You've got to get it lit. But if you've ever been to one of those big bonfires where people are doing the pallets or big stack of woods, oh, it's intense. There's some heat to that thing, right? And it can rain. There can be some wind. You get those big fires. I can take wet wood. I can pull it right out of the bottom of the lake, throw it on there, and that thing will start burning. And that's what Chris was talking about. Him and Autumn have built their fire to a point that he can engage in real intimacy. So he's not being like, oh, everyone do the right thing. Legitimately, the best sex he's ever had has been when he's in his mid-40s and his wife's in his mid-40s. No plastic surgery, no supermodeling, no nothing. It is literally the best sex he's ever had. And I can attest to the same thing in my own marriage with Kayla. And that's the part people aren't seeing when they're pre-recovery or they're in process. They're like, no, but if I just look at porn or if I just, the affair partner is so, it's so attractive. And I'm like, yeah, fireworks are big and bright. Cold, far away, expensive, always.
Oh, that's wonderful. We talked a little bit about shame. Do you have anything else you want to add about shame and guilt in the cycle of porn and sex addiction? And one of the things I love is the title of your podcast, because I do think shame is such an obstacle to people's recovery and ability to change, all people.
Yeah, to quote Terry Real from his book on male depression, which is a good one. It's an old one, but I would argue it stood the test of time.
I like him a lot.
Yeah. The title I'm trying to. Oh yeah. I don't want to talk about it. The Secret Legacy of Male Depression. But he has a quote in there that he says, "An addict," which it was in the early '90s, so I'll give him a hall pass for still labeling people addicts. But so he says, "An addict needs shame like a man dying of thirst needs salt water." So the reason why people stay in compulsive behavior is because of that identity belief in shame. Shame is what drives addiction, not compulsive behavior, not people's sex drives, not the lack of intimacy in their marriage. It's shame. Because as I start to believe, well, I am bad. I am this guy. I am this person, right? I'm stuck. And so if you aren't doing shame work, I would make the argument you aren't doing recovery. Because you have to reclaim that identity piece. Because here's the dark truth. I'm a trauma guy. I get it. We have relapse. Let's do all the things. I'm as soft as it gets from that camp on the spectrum. And I'm going to tell a dirty secret about everyone in addiction. You want to know the truth? Pay for all the therapy. Come pay for retreats at our thing, except come, do the whole thing, pay for it. Here's the real truth about everyone in addiction. You ready for it? They just stop. Everyone in addiction one day just stops. It's the craziest thing. And so you find anyone, right? I can go to Chris, who I was talking about in my office, 17, 18 years sobriety, and go, Chris. And he'll tell you the day. He'll be like, oh, yeah, the last time I watched porn was in December of 2005. And you go to all these people who I would argue are healed, because people do heal, right? And it's like, when did the thing stop? And they can take you. There's actually a point in time where I was looking at porn today, and then I didn't look tomorrow or ever again in the future. And the reason why I bring that up is because when people get their identity back, they don't do things outside their value system, right? And so I sit with people and I say, hey, Rhoda, are you going to go murder someone right now? No. Are you going to go cop a meth addiction? No. And I could bet you $1 million. I go, $1 million. And what we know, if you've seen, there's a really good TED Talk YouTube video, the Johann Hari, Everything You Think You Know About Addiction is Wrong. Right?
Yes, I've seen it.
Yeah,
Yes.
that one's beautiful because he's like, so the belief is, which is an old belief that doesn't have the research backing it, is if I take you, Rhoda, and I shoot you up with meth, right? Or if I put you in front of a screen and have you watch porn and masturbate 5 times a week for 2 months, you will, because of the dopamine, flooding in you or whatever, and that habit, you will now have become a porn addict. However, it's not how it works, which we know because that's also how people stop. They just stop. One day they literally just stop. Now, with alcohol and different substances, don't lock yourself in a hotel room and just stop, because you can literally go into cardiac arrest. With porn, you're not going to go into cardiac arrest. With your affair partner, you're not going to go into cardiac arrest. And so when people really claim that identity back, they don't do it. And so a quote from a rap artist I love, he said, I don't waste time on the centerfolds. I'm alive. It's a miracle. And so as we reclaim, right, that identity, that de-shaming back, I am not a bad person. I am not unlovable. I am enough. I am wanted in this world. I'm worthy of connection. When we get that back, it's weird. People just stop acting out.
And one of the things that I really appreciate that you talk about is values and self-worth are connected. And I just interviewed Dr. Martini, and it's a little bit intellectual, for my audience, I think. You have to kind of wade through it a little. But he has this wonderful values clarification for free, a half hour on his website. And I've probably sent the link to 10 clients, and I'm only working part-time, so that's a huge number for me. And I really want them thinking about their values, and the more you spend time in your values, the more satisfied you are with your life, just exactly the way you're saying. So back to back, I've really got the same message going out, and I really agree with you. What have you learned are common issues that couples experience as it relates to porn and sex addiction? Common issues couples experience.
Yeah, so the big one is betrayal trauma.
Yeah.
A lot of people just don't think it's real, right? And so they're like, hey, yeah, I've looked at some porn. I'm sorry about it, but my spouse is saying I cheated on them and I didn't have an affair, so I don't know what we're talking about here. And the reason why betrayal trauma is so sticky, so the clinical word would just be relational trauma, right? So this would apply to all childhood trauma too. Yes, dad should have been your protector, not the drunk guy who beat the crap out of you every weekend, right? And so I have a narrative, right? So if you and I go see Vagina Monologues, on Broadway, and I'm like, okay, Rhoda, we see you, and you're like, I don't want to walk all the way around the block. It's late, and you see the dark alley, with the dripping water and the trash and the light that's not quite working. And you go walking through that alley and you get mugged. You have a narrative for that trauma. Because you're like, dark alley, New York, middle of the night. That makes sense, right? But imagine that you go to a park with friends to have a picnic, and you sit down at the picnic, and one of them puts a bag over your head behind you, and they mug you, and they leave you there.
It's a whole different deal.
It's a whole different deal because you should have been safe, but you weren't.
Really well explained. Yes.
And so what it does is it doesn't just damage, wow, my husband or wife, because there are a bunch of women who have sexual compulsive behavior. So it's not we historically have talked about it as a gender issue that men do it, and because we have a narrative in society that men are more sexual. We're all working on it. But so it doesn't only damage the relationship. So if we use it as the husband's the one, looking at porn, wife discovers it. So boom, I get mugged in the park at the picnic. It's not just, wow, I can't trust my husband. It becomes this shame narrative of like, how dumb are you? Because if you couldn't figure out how to trust this guy, your compass is broken. What else do you think you trust in that you can't? It would be like if we're sitting here and our listeners like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, hey, did you know gravity's not real? And they're like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, no, it's not. And all of a sudden, everything in the room they were in started floating around. Do you know how many questions you would have if gravity wasn't real? You'd be like, what were they gaslighting me with in school? Like, what the hell was my church saying? Am I even a human being? Are we on planet Earth? Like, you would start questioning everything, right? And that's the experience with betrayed partners. It makes you question everything. Because if the person who was supposed to be safe wasn't, how many other choices and decisions and situations have I done in my life where I thought this compass was pointing north and I don't know where this compass is pointing at all, right? And then there's the experience, right, when a lot of people are acting out, because it's not everyone. I'm not in the boat that every man or woman who has sexual addiction is a narcissist and completely checked out all the time. There's a whole spectrum and gray of how that all actually happens. But particularly when you've been getting gaslit by someone and been told that you're snoopy, that you worry about everything, so I've worked with betrayed partners who have been in this cycle of being betrayed for like 20 years. And it does a number on someone. Because when you've been told the sky's purple for 20 years, then you find outside that it's blue and everyone else knew except you. Talk about shame and identity. You want to talk about shame transference and the work that has to be there. So I'd say the big mistake that partners make is pretending that they're not harmed. I'm like, oh no, you're harmed. Super harmed, like trauma, capital T, like all the people who have childhood abuse, all like you're in a camp of trauma. And then the second mistake they make is the codependent mistake of, well, if my partner would get healed, then I can heal. Right? And that's like getting hit by a car from a drunk driver and being like, hey, if they really go to those 12-step meetings and get healed, the bones in my legs are going to get set and I won't need a hip replacement and I'll be walking again. I hope that your partner heals and that through a boundaried healing process, you're able to stay together. However, your healing is not contingent on them getting well. If they want to live in addiction, that's a choice they can make. And so you trusting your compass and saying, I hope that drunk driver gets the help that they need. But whether they're still driving on the road drunk or the cops pick them up and they do the whole rehab thing or whatever, I am going to go to the hospital. I am going to get my bones set. I am going to get so that I'm able to walk and be free in my life. So one, you got to acknowledge you got hit by the car. You did. Cold cock splattered all over the pavement. People are like, oh. And then number two, let the ambulance take you. Worry about the drunk driver second. That's their job to worry about them. Get to the hospital, make sure you're okay, take care. And then if you want, out of the goodness of your heart, you want to show up to the rehab center 2 months later when you're well, to drop off, some flowers and say, I hope your sobriety goes well as a person who hit me and facilitate some forgiveness. Yes, that can be a beautiful experience. But don't do it while you're bleeding in the street. That's just a poor choice.
Mm. How can individuals or couples start a conversation about these issues in a supportive and non-judgmental way?
Yeah, so the thing I would tell you is that people always have a hunch, right?
Yeah.
And so I've never worked with anyone that once they started to kind of get their compass dialed weren't like, oh yeah, I knew there were signs all over the place. I was choosing not to look, or I didn't know a way out, so I just kind of kept going, or I didn't whatever. And so what I always tell people when I speak somewhere is I said, after hearing this, I encourage everyone when they listen to this episode on your show, Rhoda, is go home, go to your partner or whoever and say, hey, tell me your entire sexual history and I'll tell you mine. Mm-hmm. When did you first hear about sex in childhood? How was sex modeled for you in the home you grew up? What were some of your first sexual experience? I'm not talking about intercourse. I'm saying, when was the first time you saw a woman in a bra in a magazine? And you were like, oh, breasts, those are a thing, turns out, right? Whether you're a woman or a man, right? A woman being like, oh, am I supposed to have those? Are they supposed to look a certain way? If you're a man, you're like, I think everyone's saying those are like a really big deal, but don't talk about it, right? So all of the sexual experiences, right? What did you think romance was? What did you think connection was? What do you think love was? And then all the way to your actual sexual history. When was the first time you kissed someone, held hands? When was the first time you had sex? How many people have you had sex with? What were those experiences like? And that's going to be very connecting and intimate, right? And non-threatening. Yes. Like, just tell me about it, right? Like, what happened? What was your experience? And if your partner tells you a story that your gut is like, that's not real, or they're like, yeah, so about my sexual history, and there's some stuff there, there's a couple things to know to get started. So first off, there is a very great way to do disclosure, and there's about 1,000 super poor and harmful ways to do disclosure. So do not, capital do not, disclose your sexual compulsive behavior to your partner without consulting with a trusted third party first. I recommend a therapist who knows something about sexual compulsive behavior and has been there before. But do not, because it's Christmas Eve and you feel really guilty that you're having an affair, go drop that knowledge on your partner. Or because you're sitting in church and you feel really guilty that you're supposed to be this really Christian person and you have a whole dual life, to go, and vomit all over your partner. You are going to harm them, you, and you're going to make your recovery process take 10 times longer. So the first thing people shouldn't do is just disclose. Get to a third-party person, call Rhoda up, have her recommend someone, get there and go, hey, I'm in the middle of an affair. I'm ready to disclose it and do something about it. Help me. Because there is a very healthy way to get that disclosure out that causes the least amount. And you're laughing because you've heard a million bad disclosure stories that caused a ton of harm. So, allow that. And the other part is, if you think that there's information there, are you ready to hear it? And so if I'm like, I think my partner might be having an affair, what resourcing do I need to do in order to be ready? So if I'm looking at my home and I'm like, I have a gut feeling my house is on fire, but I just don't want to go upstairs and look. Well, prior to just running upstairs, right, I probably should know how to get some oxygen to myself? Do I have an understanding that, right, if it's smoke, I want to get low so I can get a significant amount of less smoke in my lungs? Do I know any of the tips, tricks, and tools about what to do in a fire? Or am I just going to run upstairs and hope it goes okay? And so if I'm a partner and I'm like, hey, I did the whole thing from your podcast, Rhoda. So I went to my husband. I was like, hey, can I hear your whole sexual history? And immediately the look on his face told me all that I needed to know. Don't be like, tell me I just listened to a podcast and I know this is garbage and I'm throwing your clothes out the bed, out the top window onto the curb until you get the truth to me, because that's not going to create safety. They're never going to tell you, and y'all are going to do the shenanigans forever that harms everyone. What you need to do is go, oh, there's clearly a portion of my house, if not all of it, that is aflame. I guess I better learn how fire works and what to do in a fire. So go to the therapist the same way someone would who said, hey, I'm having the affair, or I'm watching all this porn. Go to a therapist and say, I think that my husband or wife might have a sex addiction. I think they might have a porn addiction. I think they might be having an affair. What can I do to get grounded and well so as this information comes out, I can show up well to take care of myself and secondarily do the least amount of harm to them? So if you've got a hunch, don't go running into the house on fire and hope you know what you're doing. I know that looks really good in some sitcoms and movies. Go talk to some firefighters about the people who do that in real life, because they end up torched.
So, what are challenges in maintaining recovery that you can share, and how can individuals overcome them?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that's an indicator of whether someone's going to recover or not is the strength of their community. So if you were to sit 10 people in front of me and go, okay, Steve, you're betting $1 million, which one is going to hit that day where he never looks at porn again and is good to go? The only questions I'd be asking all those men is, what does their community look like? And what I mean by community is I mean people who are in this journey with you. So, for example, I have many people in my church community who are very well aware that I have cheated on Kayla, that I've got a whole story, that I'm a therapist now, it's been this whole thing or whatever, but they know my story. So I'm not in a setting at my church where I'm like, oh, I want to comment in this discussion and be like, well, but everyone doesn't actually know me, and I don't want to speak from this place where I'm filtering who I really am. So I don't care if you're like, oh, I have some great friends, or I get along really well with my coworkers, or, in my neighborhood, and we all, all of our kids are friends, and we all hang out, or I've got 4 siblings, and we all get along real great and do family trips. That's great. That's not recovery community. Do these people know about your recovery? So for me, could I get away with acting out? Yeah, of course, anyone could at any time. Rhoda, do you know what would happen if I was like, you know what? Screw this. Once an addict, always an addict. I don't believe in any of this crap anymore. I'm out of here. Do you know how many people close to me in personal, deep relationships where there has been give and take and intimacy that I would have to answer to at this point? I'm not getting out. And so the way I would say you can design your recovery is think of it like a river flowing. When people start recovery, it's an empty, dry bed. Community is like water. And as it starts to flow, your community is strong enough, you're going to make it in recovery when you can't swim to the side and get out. That current is so strong that on those days and in those moments that you're like, yeah, but I don't know, the affair partner was really nice, and I don't know, my wife's been really mean this week, and what if I just text her? You want that community so strong that you try and swim to the edge to get out of recovery. It just pushes you downstream because it's just too strong, right? And so that's true for the betrayed partner as well. You should have community. So I had a client I had recently, really cool. So she was a big runner. I don't get those people. You want to talk about people who I think are crazy and need help? Those people running the ultra marathons. I mean, mad props, but it's crazy to me. So she has this whole running group, and these women in the running group, they know her whole story. So if she shows up on a Tuesday morning at 2 a.m., because that's when they start those freaking runs, right, with these other women and says, hey, I just didn't feel safe in my marriage today. They're not like, whoa, what is she talking about? This is too deep or whatever. They're just in that flow of recovery. That's just in that river for her. And so they're able to talk and support her and move her forward. So community is an unashamed community. where you can talk about your story. And as someone who's shared their story for a long time, and I've had dozens of people on the show who share their story, I get to talk to them all year later. So I have actual sample where I'm like, cool, let's take this story. Let's put this couple on blast on our podcast, share all the details of their acting out. Let's put it everywhere in the world that anyone could download and see, and then everyone in their community and friends are going to know their story out loud, and let's see if it harms them, because we have a very old school narrative that harms people. It always helps people move forward in their recovery. Now, with that, I'd give a big disclaimer, to quote Brene Brown: we share our story with those who are worthy to hear it. So if your family of origin is not a safe place, and the siblings are judgmental, and the parents have othered you as the black sheep, and that might be, you might come from a really religious family and you're the one who's no longer religious, so there's this barrier, whatever judgment, they're all academic and you're the one who dropped out of high school, whatever. Don't listen to this podcast and go try and get all of them to hold your story. They're not going to get in the river with you. Believe them, right? So we share our story with those who are worthy to hear it, but you share your real story and have real community, number one indicator by a mile more than anything else as to whether or not you will really get to recovered.
Anything we haven't covered you'd like to fill my audience in on?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is that recovery is possible.
It is. Mm-hmm.
It's real. Normal people do it all the time. That was the inspiration for starting it. Is Chris, who I shared, who now works with. I heard him and his wife's story, and I remember leaving just in tears and calling Kayla and being like, they are normal people. These are not celebrities. These are normal, everyday people. And I don't get how he's doing what he's doing, but he's clearly doing it because this guy has no motivation to be here having this conversation other than the fact that it's real. And so what I would tell people is you have to find hope. Find people, stories, communities that can believe in that hope. I can tell you how I did my recovery. I started a nonprofit and a podcast called Unashamed, Unafraid. That gave me an excuse to be sitting in front of people who, what did they do? They filled me with hope. No one has benefited more in their recovery at Unashamed, Unafraid than me. Not a single listener. And we've had people come in, hey, podcast saved my life. Miracles have happened. The person who's benefited the most is me because I've been able to put myself in front of people who believe in it. And so whether it's a therapist or family, church, whoever it is, find the people who have hope, who give you hope. And I really have strong core beliefs that if you start looking for that hope in your life, you will find it. So find that thread, however small that hope, and follow that.
So share with my audience where they can get more information and how to find your group, and remind them about the title of your podcast.
Yes, so Unashamed Unafraid is the name of the podcast organization, so that you can find us anywhere and everywhere where podcasts are found. We did an excellent episode that at the time of this recording, we actually just released it today, was of Rhoda coming on our podcast talking about coupleship. So awesome. So come listen to her episode. It's fantastic. But all the episodes and stories, so Unashamed Unafraid, you can go to unashamedunafraid.com. If you need scholarships or resources, can find all of the stuff there to do that. The therapy side for us is called Accepted. So it's acceptedlife.com if you want to talk about the therapy things. And we have a whole bunch of volunteers. If you call us and need a story of hope or someone to talk to, we call back. So go on the website, send us an email. If you can't find hope anywhere else, we would love to connect you. And we have all the time that someone calls, I'm alone in Pennsylvania. I got to be the only person working sexual addiction. And we're like, whatever, where are you at? We do this all the time. We're like, there's another guy who lives in your city who's been doing recovery road, or call him and hook it up. So would love if we can be that source of hope. Find us social media at Unashamed Unafraid. But yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today as we explored the intricate intersection of pornography pornography, sex addiction, and relationships. Remember, understanding and open communication are key to navigating this topic in every partnership. We hope today's conversation has offered valuable insights and perspectives. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and take care of yourselves and each other. You can follow me on Instagram at Rhoda on Couples.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.